Hey, it's Matt Robison, and here's our latest episode of Political Rehab. This is the show that's kind of a mashup of PTI and The Daily Show, where a Republican named Matt and me, a Democrat who's also named Matt, try to make sense of the week's political news. We hit the top stories. We blast Trump when necessary, which is usually we do our weekly "That's Bullshit" segment. And as always, we end with a dose of hope. I'm really happy that this episode is going out on the Blue Amp Cliff's Edge YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel, Worth Knowing with Matt Robison, and on my Substack, Worth Knowing with Matt Robison. So wherever you're watching, please hit subscribe to support this kind of work. And just so you know, I'm live with you right now, but the rest of this episode was previously recorded. Here we go.
Dismal failure. It is political suicide.
There's no difference anymore. These guys are all the same. Give me the one that we have a higher chance of beating.
This is actually kind of a good news story because it does give me hope that we can actually win the White House again.
The White House strategy is to absolutely crush it with their target audience, which is angry incels. Welcome to Political Rehab. I'm Matt Robison, a Democrat and former congressional staffer.
And I'm Matt Wylie, a Republican campaign strategist.
Today, war porn, a dangerous brain drain, Putin targets American troops, Trump picking Rubio over Vance, the White House's biggest gamble so far, plus the stupidest fight in politics is coming to the Senate floor. But let's start, as always, with our Trump dump.
Time for the Trump dump.
That's right. Time for the Trump dump. Because it doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or independent. There is something Donald Trump did this week that pissed you off.
And something that did not piss me off, that actually kind of delighted me, is the fact that Donald Trump has been taking a beating in the courts over the last week. Just in the last few days, he lost on immigration. A federal judge blocked a Trump administration rule that would have fast-tracked the dismissal of immigration appeals. That's a mouthful, saying it violated federal law and threatened due process. A federal appeals court ruled the administration must continue funding the $16 billion Hudson Rail Tunnel project after trying to halt the money for political purposes. And a judge halted construction of an ICE detention facility in Maryland. Now, most rational adults know how this works. If you try out for your high school basketball team, and then the AAU team, and then the rec center league, and no one even picks you for the pickup game at the park, at some point you might rethink your NBA career. You might take the hint and say, maybe I'm doing something wrong here. Donald Trump does the opposite. Trump keeps losing in court, and instead of learning the rules, he's trying to fire the referees. Reuters recently reported that the administration has filed an unusually large number of emergency petitions to the Supreme Court, trying to limit the power of lower court judges to block presidential actions and trying to undermine and overturn their rulings because they just can't freaking believe that they might actually lose. And that constitutes an emergency. Trump has also tried to undermine the judges themselves. He's called them so-called judges. He's accused the courts of being corrupt or rigged. And he's attacked specific judges personally whenever they rule against him. This isn't just about Trump being a whiny, sore loser, although he absolutely is. It's about undermining the institution of the judiciary itself. Congress already has approval ratings in the single digits. Trump's doing everything possible to destroy respect for the presidency. The last institution of our three-part federal system is trust in the court system. At least it kind of still is. And that's why Trump is going after it. Because when courts are the only branch left capable of saying no to a president, the easiest solution for an authoritarian isn't to just follow the law. It's to convince people that the courts themselves can't be trusted. Losing in court is part of living in a country governed by law. Attacking the courts is what happens when someone wants to govern without it.
Your Trump impression is getting so much better. So
go on. I love what I'm hearing.
House Republicans held a retreat this week to define their agenda for the midterms. And after days of meeting, I'm not sure we have one. Think about that. The retreat is supposed to set the agenda going into the election. It's our chance to drive the issues that will help us win. Fundamentally, it's supposed to answer the most basic of basic political questions. What does it actually mean if Republicans are in charge? What are we doing with power? Why should voters keep us in power? Instead, the headlines coming out of the meeting sound like the party is still trying to figure it out. What the hell are we doing? How can you not come up with a basic agenda? Give us something to work with. That's not just disappointing. It's an abysmal failure. It is political suicide. Successful parties, those that actually win elections, know what they stand for and can easily make the case to the American people. Ronald Reagan ran on tax cuts and restoring American strength. Newt Gingrich had the contract with America. Donald Trump had build the wall and drain the swamp. But right now, the Republican message too often sounds like this: Democrats are bad. And listen, Democrats make that argument pretty easily sometimes. You hear calls to defund ICE, Washington budget fights that leave travelers stuck in TSA lines, a left wing drifting further and further towards socialist ideas. Voters see that. But here's the problem: Democrats are bad is not an agenda, it's a campaign slogan. And campaign slogans unravel when voters eventually ask a very simple question. Okay, but you're in charge. What exactly have you done? What are you going to do? Lower prices, energy independence, border security, spending cuts, election integrity? Pick the agenda, define it, explain it. Because if you can't explain what you stand for to the American people, the voters will replace you with someone who can.
I would like to reject the assertion that I'm bad. I'm great.
You are great.
I'm
great.
Speaking of making things great again, let's get to this week's rundown. As covered in last week's edition of That's Bullshit, the White House and Pentagon have begun releasing highly produced social media ready videos showing missile strikes on Iran, but edited with clips from action movies, sports highlights, and video games.
We've taken control.
Critics, including me, say that the videos turn real combat footage into a kind of entertainment product, a style that some people are calling war porn. The administration says the clips are meant to showcase military success and reach younger audiences online because that's the function of the Department of War. But the approach has sparked a debate about whether war messaging is becoming gamified propaganda rather than public communication. Matt, defend you boys.
Look, I think the whole thing has this frat house vibe, a little bro-y here. I envision Hegseth, hat on backwards, shotgun and a beer, watching missile strikes in his basement, high-fiving his buddies every time something blows up. I think that's why the Colin Jost impersonation on SNL lands so well right now.
Look, you guys don't understand what we're doing here, okay? Y'all playing chess, I'm playing Grand Theft Auto.
How we talk about war shouldn't sound like a Call of Duty montage, but it really is messaging for social media. It's not just to try to bro out. I think there's a big piece of this. It's a message to the world. I'm going to go out on a limb. I think we're going to see what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz as justification on why Donald Trump is probably going to try to take the Panama Canal. And he's going to look at these videos and he's going to show these videos as proof that he's not going to back down.
I'm going to connect a dot over to a story that was big 6 months ago. ICE was doing a $100 million wartime recruitment campaign that was targeted at people who like to watch MMA, video games, and people who attended gun rights conventions. It seems like the entire target audience for everything that they're doing is the bro culture that you were talking about. The American public has already rejected. This is not a good idea. It was not well thought out. We don't agree with your aims. We don't understand what your aims are. We certainly don't want you turning this all into a video game, especially when it's just been discovered that, yes, the U.S. was responsible for the missile that killed 165 schoolgirls in Iran. Since Americans are so roundly rejecting the war, it's clear that the White House strategy is to absolutely crush it with their target audience, which is angry incels. And they're doing a hell of a great job at that.
You're correct. And it's interesting because you talk about the intelligence, and we're experiencing a real brain drain here in Washington. There are new reports out there that the DOGE cuts may have actually gotten rid of national security officials with expertise on Iran. And then there's a report that Kash Patel fired about a dozen FBI agents and staff members from counterintelligence units that worked on threats from Iran. We're trying to show the strength in the war porn, but we don't have the intel that we need to protect Americans. So are we less safe now because of this?
Oh, hell yeah. Look, the Trump administration seems to treat knowledge and intelligence the same way RFK Jr. treats vaccines, something that's clearly good for you, but is very scary, and I don't really want it. Look, when they tried to adopt the most consequential economic policy in years, the Liberation Day tariffs, they literally went to ChatGPT and had it come up with the tariffs for them. When young Doge staffers with no experience in government administration were brought in to evaluate grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, you can look this one up. This is a news story over the past week. They literally, once again, asked ChatGPT to do it for them. And because they didn't want to have to read, they said, could you just please give me like a yes or no answer first? Does this have any DEI in it? I wrote a whole Newsweek article on the all-out assault that this administration has waged on scientists and research and skilled professionals in medicine and law. It is not going too far to connect a couple of very obvious dots and say the Trump administration doesn't just ignore expert analysis. They are allergic to it. They suspect it. They hate it. They're afraid of it because they probably don't really understand it, and it tends to get in the way of their insane fantasies. So you're right on the mark, Matt. They are absolutely, positively gutting our analytical capabilities and shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah. And where I think this comes into play is we suspect there's sleeper cells within the United States. And Donald Trump has come out this week where he said, we know where they all are. Well, if we don't have the intelligence, if we don't have the experts, then we also probably don't know where they are. And if we don't have the intelligence, we don't have the experts, maybe that's why we're so surprised that when we go to war with Iran, all of a sudden they're closing the Straits of Hormuz and we can't get oil out of there. And now everything's skyrocketing because everything is a big surprise to the Trump administration because you fired the people who could have told you that this was a consequence. And I think Americans are going to pay that price. And hopefully that price is only higher oil and not something more tragic.
Speaking of paying the price for our wars, there was perhaps the most underreported news item of the year in the past week. U.S. intelligence officials say Russia may be providing Iran with satellite-derived intelligence that could help Tehran locate American ships, aircraft, and troop positions in the Middle East. To dumb that down for just a second, Vladimir Putin's Russia is telling our enemy in a war how to go after and kill American troops. Matt, why is this not a bigger story? And why isn't the president of the United States absolutely irate with our sworn enemy, Russia?
First of all, this should come as no surprise. I don't know why there's some in MAGA that want to pretend Russia is a friend. They are not a friend. They want to hurt Americans. They want to rebuild the Soviet Union. It should not be a surprise whatsoever. And it's not just Trump. Where are the Republicans in the Senate? Where are Republicans in Congress? They should be screaming at this because we're putting American lives at danger because of what Russia is doing. We should be irate about this. This should be all over the news.
This seems like a good time to remind people of a few pertinent facts. Donald Trump literally has a framed photo of Vladimir Putin up in the White House. Investigative journalists like Craig Unger have documented that the KGB identified Trump as a high-value asset back in the 1980s, began openly cultivating him. And later, the Russian mafia, which has tremendous overlap with the Putin administration, used Trump's real estate properties to launder their money. What Trump has done successfully over the years is turn any question of why he's such a Russian stooge into a polarized partisan issue. If you talk about it, all of MAGA world lines up to scream bloody murder, that you're deranged or part of a witch hunt. Don't forget that Trump's first campaign chairman was handing over secret polling data to the Russian KGB or their successor agencies. A Republican-led Senate intelligence report found that Russia absolutely, positively interfered in our elections. Republicans said this, that they used military assets to attack us. Trump kissed Putin's ass in Helsinki in 2018. He called Putin a genius for invading Ukraine. Just last year, he held a fake summit with Putin and came out parroting Russian talking points. You are right. Russia is our enemy. Everyone on earth knows this except for Trump and deranged MAGA people. And it is just shocking that he's actively helping them. He's actively on their side. What a cowardly traitor we have in the White House.
Switching gears, in the middle of everything that is going on in Iran, Donald Trump got some donors together and held an informal poll of what they would like to see as the successor to MAGA. Is it Marco Rubio, JD Vance? And they overwhelmingly chose Rubio. I have long said, and I don't like to make a lot of predictions, that JD Vance will never be elected president of the United States. He doesn't have a coalition. He doesn't have a base. People don't trust him. People in the middle hate him. So for me, this is actually kind of a good news story because it does give me hope that we can actually win the White House again. But the second piece of this that I think is also more interesting is that Rubio seems to be the one standout in this administration that seems to make sense. He seems to come out on ahead. Matt, what do you make of all this?
I mean, Rubio is like the least bad in a horrifying bunch. So sure, yeah. What's going on here is that Trump is using these kinds of confabs and the media and throwing out some praise for Rubio and not putting out as much praise for Vance as a way to send a message. We've seen it over and over again. You can't win a Republican primary without Trump's endorsement. He exercises complete veto power over who gets to have a career in Republican politics and who doesn't. We saw it again in the primary to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene, where Trump's endorsee won that particular primary. I don't think this is any decision at all about who he's going to endorse. I think this is just him sending signals through the media so that he can spank Vance around a little bit, which I guess they like to get up to in their spare time, if South Park is to be believed. And this is because Vance has expressed some reservations about invading Iran. This is just Trump doing a dominance display. He's like a dog peeing in a corner where another dog just peed. That's all this is about. It's the same thing with Cornyn, right? Cornyn ostentatiously writes an op-ed in the Times about the SAVE Act, which we're going to talk about in a minute, where he's, we should nuke the filibuster to pass the SAVE Act, which Republican leader John Thune already said we're not going to do. So he's on safe ground there. He's just signaling. He's just kissing Trump's ass, which is basically the primary occupation of elected Republicans these days. Boy, I'm glad you're not elected to office because you'd be too busy with your tongue to do this show.
That's actually probably true.
Oh, wait, no, not that last part.
No, glad I'm not elected office. That's the piece is, look, here's the thing. And going back to Cornyn for 1 second, the issue here is Trump even signaled to Cornyn that he had to do this. Because when Trump was asked, will you endorse Cornyn? Because apparently he was all ready to endorse Cornyn. And then Paxton put out a bunch of things to sort of make him backtrack whether or not he should. Trump's answer is, well, we got to get the SAVE Act passed. And so all of a sudden, Cornyn, magically, who has been for decades a supporter of the filibuster, now changes and says, no, maybe we don't, because this is just too important. And if we don't, then the Democrats are going to do something like it too. It really goes to how spineless Republicans are in Congress right now and how there are so very few people that are going to stand up and actually do what's right. And that's why I would never want to be in Congress, because right now it's a problem.
Let me tell you something from a Democrat's perspective. I'm full on rooting for Ken Paxton in that primary. I mean, one could say, well, Cornyn seems a bigger adult in the room. He's not like a criminal the way Paxton is. He's not a dirty, immoral son of a you-know-what like Paxton is. He doesn't seem to be totally in hock to the MAGA movement. Let me tell you something. There's no difference anymore. These guys are all the same. Give me the one that we have a higher chance of beating. But at the end of the day, they all kiss Trump's ass. They all do his bidding. There's no difference. Cornyn, Paxton, they've all just gone down a MAGA rabbit hole. And they're all lost. Speaking of MAGA rabbit holes, the White House seems determined to go down one. There was a blind quote that appeared this week from a senior White House staffer saying that they fully recognize that the recent spike in prices at gas pumps could be a political problem for them. Yeah, no shit, guys. You think with affordability being the number one voter issue in America, you think that might be a little bit of a problem? But they're confident that it's going to resolve far enough in advance of the midterms that it's not really going to hurt them. Matt, you are an active Republican campaign operative. How do you feel about the White House playing around with this core economic issue?
It feels like the White House is playing Russian roulette with the Republican majority. This is an absolute unmitigated disaster. First of all, it would be different if the president had ever come on TV and explained to the American people why we were even doing this. So all he's really saying is, I felt like blowing up people. And by the way, have fun with your higher gas prices. It has been his number one issue on why his agenda is working. And now we're seeing him go up 30, 40, 50 cents a gallon with really no end in sight. You can release all the strategic oil reserves you want. And oh yeah, by the way, remember when Biden did that and we all were batshit crazy over all that? Yeah, now we're doing it.
I remember that.
You remember that?
It starts with an H for that kind of
Yes.
thing. Hypocritical.
I think that's it. Yes. And for some reason now MAGA's just loving it, but it won't make a dent. This is all symbolism over substance. Now we're going hat in hand to every other country that we never told we were going to do this and asking them to do it as well. Affordability is going to be the biggest issue. And like I said in my Trump dump, we don't have an agenda. We don't have a plan. And affordability seems completely foreign. And Trump still wants to call it a made up term by the Democrats. And this is just going to shoot us in the foot.
There is a logical flaw in the White House's thinking, as evinced by this anonymous staffer here. And that is, if everything goes well, we shouldn't have a problem. Well, you're right about that. It is true that economic effects this far out, more than 6 months in advance of an election, don't have a lingering effect. As a matter of fact, polling doesn't really predict that well what's going to happen this far out, but that's assuming everything goes well. Don't forget that we just got a jobs report showing that we lost 92,000 jobs in February after the previous jobs report showed that we essentially gained no jobs through all of 2025. So we could be entering a very rough economic patch with affordability absolutely top of mind. And that's assuming everything goes well and the price shock doesn't continue to spool out, which there's no guarantee that is going to happen. And on that somewhat dour note, let's go to an even dourer note. Let's take a deep dive.
Let's go beyond the headlines. It's time for a deep dive.
Is Congress about to completely collapse because of the absolute stupidest issue anyone can think of? It could. This is my Newsweek article called "The Coming Congressional Meltdown Over a Phantom Menace." I'll tell you what the issue is, why it's so stupid, how we've proved that it's stupid, how it's mostly Republicans' fault, but with a dash of responsibility for Democrats, and where this is all likely to go next. Here it is. Don't look now, but the political parties are increasingly likely to collapse into their ugliest dysfunction in memory. And it's over an issue that makes 2025's gerrymandering spat, previous record holder for stupid, destructive cell phone politics, look positively Einsteinian by comparison. For decades, Republicans have ridden the political hobby horse of trying to pass voter ID laws, both at the state and federal level. They've obsessively claimed that America needs strict new federal standards to verify voter identities and prevent fraud, particularly the threat of non-citizen voting. But it's a ghost story. Study after study has shown that voter fraud of any kind is virtually non-existent. The Heritage Foundation, the most influential conservative think tank, and the folks behind Project 2025, found only 10 cases involving in-person impersonation fraud and 41 cases involving non-citizens registering, voting, or attempting to vote out of billions of votes cast. And not for lack of looking. And the most comprehensive review of non-citizen voting looked at 23.5 million votes in areas with high immigrant populations and found just 30 suspected cases. That's 0.0001%. So you're 5 times more likely to be struck by lightning or attacked by a shark than to ever find a fraudulent vote in America. Heck, you're more likely to die in a sharknado. Plus, the whole idea is absurd. It's already illegal for non-citizens to vote. The extraordinarily rare cases that happen leave a clear paper trail. States regularly check. Why would non-citizens intentionally commit such an obvious crime, one where they're super likely to get caught, to shift a single vote? The thing is, congressional Republicans aren't dumb. They know that their substantive case is weaker than the writing for the movie Melania. They know that their new steroidal version of voter ID, the SAVE Act, which requires Americans to show a passport or driver's license plus birth certificate to register, will likely disenfranchise most of the 21 million American citizens currently unable to access those additional documents, including married women who chose to change their name. And they know that wiping out the rights of almost 10% of voting age U.S. citizens to stop a handful of illegitimate votes per election is insane. But they also know that these millions of disenfranchised citizens would come disproportionately from groups that tend to support Democrats more. They're also acutely aware that over 80% of Americans who pay little attention to policy details vaguely support some form of voter ID. And they know they need to change the current media narrative. For a party and a president drowning on nearly every issue, even Fox News agrees, this seems like a lifeboat, which is why President Donald Trump and allied activists are trying to jawbone Republican senators and forcing Senate Democrats into an old-fashioned, weeks-long, Mr. Smith goes to Washington-esque talking filibuster on the SAVE Act. Never mind that it would functionally shut down Congress while we're at war with Iran, weighing Trump's new round of tariffs, and trying to deal with an economy sputtering under persistently high inflation and practically zero job creation. For Republicans, redirecting public focus by talking this phantom problem to death is a feature, not a bug. Especially if they ultimately kill the filibuster, pass the bill, and knock a bunch of Democrats off the voter rolls. If anyone can find a more cynical move than paralyzing Congress to throw red meat to your political base and or crush citizens' constitutional rights in a Hail Mary bid to salvage a few seats in the midterm while the country groans under the weight of real problems, I'm all ears. Especially because this bill amounts to closing a right-wing doom loop. All the Republicans shrieking about non-citizen votes is what cratered public trust in elections among Republicans, and only Republicans, not other voters, in the first place, which is why their base is in their leaders' ears demanding that they go to the mattresses. They think this ghost is real. Republicans came up with a non-solution to a fake problem that they themselves created, and their voters bought into it so much that they might be forced to go through with a whole charade. To be sure, Democrats could have lanced this political boil when they held power by passing a compromise voter ID law that gave citizens free and easy access to documents. But that's 2020 hindsight. Will this maneuver work? Depressingly, maybe, but maybe not. Polls already show that only 32% of voters think Trump has the right priorities. And this issue is not what most voters want to see their government stalling over when they can't afford their bills. Not to mention that voters paying more attention to the paper-thin fiction that Republicans are selling here might not be a great idea for them. Polling drops precipitously when people realize that Republican voter ID laws make it hard for actual citizens to vote. Either way, we may be approaching a true low point in an otherwise appalling political era. So that's the article, and I'll note that since I wrote this 2 weeks ago, Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune has said he's not going to cave in to all those demands for a talking filibuster. But in a Truth Social post, President Donald Trump has drawn a red line, saying that nothing else can become law until the SAVE Act has passed, because he will not sign any other bills. And so, we may very well end up with the stupidest congressional meltdown in history.
So, Matt, that was our deep dive explainer on the underlying issue. And I want to pick up on something that I said as part of the Newsweek piece. Republicans aren't dumb, at least the ones I know, like you. So could you explain for the rest of us what's really happening inside the Republican mind on this? Is this issue totally cynical because that's the way Democrats tend to see it? Could you just walk through what's really going on here?
If you apply truth serum to Republican operatives, we're going to agree with you. Voter fraud is rare. It does exist. Look, there's a video from Bridgeport where an individual was caught on camera stuffing absentee ballots into a drop box. In 2018 in North Carolina, there was one in Paterson, New Jersey in 2020 where they illegally collected and submitted mail ballots. But if you notice what I said here, those are all ballot handling problems. Those are collection, custody, and enforcement. They're not non-citizen voting. Now, we will 100% say we do need voter ID. It is something that is a good safety step. But at the end of the day, we're not really looking at an election saying, I know what, let's prevent illegal aliens. We're dealing with much more mechanical issues.
What I hear you saying is there is an issue of principle involved for serious people.
Yes.
who happen to be Republicans.
Yes.
You think there's a sanctity to voting. You're concerned about chain of custody, which is some of the concern that we've heard around mail-in voting and drop boxes. You are willing to admit under Truth Serum that the real problems, few and far between as they may be, have been leveraged cynically by certain people, predominantly in your party. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that is fair. Its core principle is that the integrity of our system must be upheld. And tales of stolen elections are fairy tales. They're bedtime stories meant to frighten people. It would take an Ocean's 11 magnitude kind of caper, if you will, to have stolen an election the way that has been alleged by some in my party.
And to be clear on that point, it has happened in American history, right? It notably happened in 1948 for LBJ and his Senate election, where the election was absolutely positively stolen. It is a very likely historic fact that the 1960 presidential election was substantially affected by some kind of voter fraud in Illinois and in Texas. That kind of fraud occurred. Cannot be done because of the protections that are in place these days. I want to take a dose of Truth Serum myself because I wrote on Alternet in 2021 an article saying that Democrats should cut a deal. And it's not because I buy into Republicans' voter fraud bullshit. It's because I recognize the point you're making, that there is an issue of principle that I can respect. But I also recognize the political reality, which is we had a moment where Democrats held power, and this was going to come up over and over again. And as I said in that video piece, we could have lanced this particular boil. And there is a deal to be had here. We could have voter ID, which, by the way, the majority of states have some version of voter ID today.
Yeah, exactly.
And we could make those identifying documents free and easy to access for American citizens. That would be a win-win for everyone. And to the extent that your concern and serious Republicans' concern is, well, what about chain of custody? We could address that too. I believe in the kind of more conservative approach to this, which is elections are supposed to be run by states, and we should let different approaches proliferate in different states. States that want to do a lot of mail-in voting should be allowed to do it. But would I be willing to strike some kind of a federal standard deal that reduces the amount of mail-in voting, but increases an early voting window for easy access in-person voting, so we don't have these crazy disproportionate lines in African-American precincts that create a barrier to certain Americans voting? Could we make easy in-person, easy access voting more of a thing and limit mail-in voting to groups that truly need it for their convenience? There's probably a deal.
There's a lot of layers that come into this. When you hear Republicans talk about election integrity, not stolen elections. Stolen elections is something different. That's a made-up animal. When we talk about election integrity, it's about preserving the sanctity of our elections. The problem is the president has made it impossible for us to talk about those things. A lot of Republicans like me say, okay, it just makes sense to have voter ID laws, but we do have to make sure that it is not so rigid. When you get to the SAVE Act, as a conservative, my first problem, and you touched on this, is it federalizes election administration. There are states that have different issues in Alaska than you have in South Carolina and up in the Northeast. This whole mail-in voting is another made-up boogeyman, because the reality of the situation is in states that do it well, there is a chain of custody there. 1 in 4 Republicans actually vote by mail. If you take away 25% of those voters and now you hope that they show up on election day, you're going to lose some of those. I mean, this is not a conservative bill. It is a bad bill. If you just did voter ID, I think you could get a lot of people out there, but the rest of this stuff is garbage. And it's an attempt by Trump to be able to create something to justify losing or to create a boogeyman to try to rally people around. I'm already seeing fundraising emails on it. Again, if I'm taking a dose of Truth Serum, these are not the problems that we face on elections.
And they're not also the problems that are the most pressing for most
Right.
Americans. And so just to try to wrap this up, I think we can agree that the vast majority of the reason we're even talking about this is that very cynical political people have been using this issue for years now, and Trump is just doing the steroids version of it to try to raise money, create big boogeymen, to try to blame other people for their losses. I'm looking at you, Don. And maybe if they succeed, to gain a partisan advantage by disproportionately kicking Democrats who are American citizens off of voter rolls. It's wrong, cynical, immoral, underhanded, anti-democratic, and about 5 other adjectives that I'm not going to bore people with. I can respect the legitimate issues. I don't think they're an emergency. I think the only reason that there's any urgency to this is that Republicans spent years screaming fraud, rigging, there's a problem, until the base started to believe it. So this is a problem among your own voters of your own creation. I think there are some legitimate issues with voting, and I think they are addressable. There are compromises to be had. I can respect the principle that there should be some kind of identification. And I think for political reasons, for political, pragmatic, smart, strategic reasons, Democrats should have addressed this a long time ago by making a deal, making documents easy to get, making sure that there was the easiest possible form of voter ID and getting this issue dealt with once and for all. But instead, we're living with it again, and hopefully this will be the last time we deal with it for now, but I have a sinking feeling that it is going to come back soon. Speaking of issues that are almost entirely made up of chicanery and nonsense, let's get to this week's edition of That's Bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Bullshit.
A bullshit?
The Make America Healthy Again movement says it's about science and health and protecting children, but we've just seen a vivid demonstration, 2 actually, that the entire thing is built on layers and layers of incoherent bullshit. And in fact, as I'll get into in just a minute, the order in which these 2 demonstrations happened is really interesting and really revealing in terms of what MAHA is really about. On March 9th, the MAHA Institute, which is a think tank that advocates for what it says are health policies and is tied to Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., held a conference in Washington. RFK stayed away from it because even the Trump White House knows how crazy these people are, and it didn't take long for the mask to come off. These are screen grabs of actual slides that they put up at their conference. They claimed that 70% of chronic diseases come from vaccines, including autism, epilepsy, learning disabilities, allergies, asthma, lupus, MS, the boogie-woogie flu, left-handedness, FOMO, and reading long and increasingly made-up lists. They claimed that vaccines cause 100 times more injuries than are ever reported, and the way they proved it is they literally took the official numbers and crossed them out with a red X and multiplied them by 100. Actually, it is true that adverse effects from vaccines are underreported, but almost all of these adverse effects are mild, like a sore arm, a small rash, not death. You can't just take a Sharpie and draw whatever thing you imagine to be true. Maybe the best one was when they addressed the war on measles and they took the side of measles. They actually made the claim that RFK Jr. has made before, that getting measles is great because it protects you against cancer. Let's be clear. This is entirely made up. Here's an article from the Harvard School of Public Health that literally says measles infections don't protect against cancer. The truth is that measles vaccines, which are 97% effective, are one of the great triumphs of 20th century medicine. But vaccine conspiracy theorists have caused more hesitancy about getting the vaccine, which has led to a comeback for measles. And these guys clearly want to finish the job. There's a lot more, but I can sum it all up the way this actual expert did by basically just saying they're all making their numbers up.
We know that the secretary has leaned on debunked science in his anti-vaccine claims. How reliable is this report's data, in your view?
Well, there's no data in this report. Some of it was hallucinated.
But pointing out that the MAHA people are pushing a bunch of scientific gobbledygook isn't totally new, and it's not where the real bullshit resides. The real scam here is the idea that this is all about health and safety, and that it's independent from RFK Jr., or the Department of Health and Human Services, or the entire Trump administration, because Mark Gorton, the president of the MAHA Institute, revealed their real agenda in a spectacular case of saying the quiet part out loud. The childhood vaccination schedule needs to be eliminated. All vaccines need to be removed from the market until they can be proven to be safe and effective. He went on to show slides saying vaccines are the greatest scam in medical history and to launch a new slogan for the MAHA movement, massive epidemic of vaccine injury. As for the idea that this is somehow independent, reporters noted that while RFK made himself scarce, his name and likeness were everywhere. And it's pretty hard to duck the fact that the MAHA Institute is his agenda, which is the Trump administration's agenda, when the White House is putting out videos like this.
Under President Trump and Secretary Kennedy's leadership, the movement to make America healthy again has begun. We're investigating the root causes of autism. We're rewriting America's dietary guidelines. No more toxic dyes, only safe, natural ingredients.
But what's worse is the second piece of hypocritical bullshit that just happened right before this big conference.
The MAGA and MAHA movements are clashing over the herbicide glyphosate, the most widely used weed killer in U.S. agriculture. Before the 2024 election, RFK Jr. tweeted that glyphosate was one of the likely culprits in America's chronic disease epidemic. So it came as a surprise to many when the president signed an executive order on Wednesday providing immunity for producers of glyphosate.
It's a chemical that you will find in your urine, your breast milk, your hair. It's been shown to kill sperm. That's why it became a banner chemical for MAHA.
Just so we're clear, RFK's position, and hence the MAHA movement's position, is that vaccines tested for decades and used by billions and billions of human beings, saving literally hundreds of millions of lives around the world, must be removed from the market. Glyphosate, the pesticide you spent years suing over, that's suddenly fine because it's politically convenient for Donald Trump. The thing to bear in mind here is that the announcement about glyphosate came 2 weeks before the MAHA conference. So this supposed banner chemical for MAHA, this action from Trump that supposedly enraged the MAHA movement, within 2 weeks, it was all forgotten. Like these people have been flashed by the men in black. The patron saint, RFK, had spoken, and all of a sudden, it was all, his name is Robert Paulson, and 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. That's how you know this supposed movement is more like the movementarians.
The leader is good, the leader is great. We surrender our will as of the state.
It's a cult. They don't have core beliefs. They don't have a coherent philosophy. They just have a collection of fears, conspiracies, and an agenda to get rid of vaccines for kids, come up with acronyms, and be a part of the political game. That's not a health movement. That's just bullshit. All right. And finally, and with that, let's get a little more upbeat and go to this week's Dose of Hope.
I read a story this week. A startup wants to launch giant mirrors into space to reflect sunlight back onto Earth at night. And I immediately thought, wait a minute, wasn't that basically what Dr. Evil's plan was? I'm pretty sure the last guy with mirrors in space was trying to hold the world ransom for $1 million.
This is the phase in which we put a giant laser on the moon. When the moon reaches its appropriate lunar alignment, it will destroy Washington, D.C. You see, I've turned the moon into what I like to call a Death Star.
So after I saw that, it sent me down a rabbit hole. And it turns out there are some pretty wild ideas out there right now. Scientists are working on car batteries powered by sodium, basically salt. Another team is building batteries that can store electricity while also turning seawater into drinking water. And fusion power plants might actually be getting close to producing real electricity. Now, some of these ideas will fail. I'm sure space lasers and mirrors may be one of those, but some of them probably will succeed. And somewhere between crazy science fiction and real innovation is usually where progress happens. So while politics often feels stuck arguing around the same problems, the good news is the future is still being invented. And that's my dose of hope.
Wow, space lasers. I knew Marjorie Taylor Greene had a career after Congress. For my dose of hope, I want to do a little callback to our earlier segment in my Trump dump, where I talk about how Donald Trump keeps losing in court. Oh, I could just say that sentence over and over again. It's fantastic. Instead of accepting the rulings or changing their ways, which is what most people do when they lose lawsuits, and hopefully what people do when they become convicted felons, like Trump is, Donald Trump just doubles down and attacks the courts because he likes legal rulings to be like his pants, loose and full of shit. But let's not skip over the most important part of that earlier story. Trump is losing these cases, like a lot of them. Legal trackers have identified hundreds of lawsuits challenging Trump administration actions in federal court. And among cases that have actually reached decisions, there are about 225 rulings against the administration, about 112 rulings for the administration. I know we're not supposed to do math in this part of the show, but that means that Trump is losing roughly 2 cases for every one he wins. I guess he got so sick of so much winning, he decided to stop winning altogether. And that's awesome. Now, it's true that Trump has sometimes had better luck at the Supreme Court level, but the vast majority of federal cases never get that far. And most cases end at the district or appeals court level. And that's where he's been losing the most. And these aren't just minor procedural disputes. These are cases involving immigration rules, environmental policies, federal funding, due process protections, the law. In other words, the courts are ruling on real things that affect millions of Americans. So, yes, we should absolutely criticize, excoriate Donald Trump for trying to undermine the judiciary and the rule of law. But we should also recognize something important. So far, the courts are holding. Trump may be attacking the rule of law, but right now, the rule of law is winning. And on that delightful note from Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.